Hi everyone, today we are going to talk a little bit more about the project scope. We have seen the charter and we talked briefly about the scope, but we want to get down to action. Basically, the scope is one of the most critical parts of the project, because it is when we start showing that we have sufficient understanding, we have clear idea, and we are starting to create the building blocks of the project estimate, which will determine all the schedule or the budget, all the risk, everything that will define the project. Scope is more of a human creative part and less of a tool. So specifically at this part, you don't want to worry too much about tools. You can imagine the scope is the actual first step of creation in a project. It is, if you want to say, 90% human creativity and 10% process and tool support and so forth. Project scope, you can see it as three main areas. The first area is understanding the requirements. In our case, in our project, we have a project description, and we intentionally put it at a high level to show how we can practice generating the scope by actually collecting requirements. Or in our case, since we're not going to go anywhere to collect the requirements, it is generating requirements based on two things. The first thing is what we will receive as a project description, and the second thing is a prototype. So the way it works in many cases, in many agile approaches, is you don't start with a stacked requirements document, an SRS, but you start with a high-level description of a project given by customers, which normally expect you to provide an actual understanding, a deeper understanding, technology-based understanding. So in this regard, you would take their initial project description and reflect it also on the chart, as we have seen, and this is kind of a high level to high level, which doesn't mean much to you as a project management except for a starting point. But then you will take them and start adding your insight, both into technology and into the project management details. So what that means is you take the project description and you go and start sketching some concrete ideas, and that's what we call the prototype. So the prototype is really going to help you transform the customer, what the customer wants, and that's what we call the wants, into the needs. And the difference is important. The wants is kind of the customer wish list. It's high level, it's incomplete, it's probably inconsistent. It's what they want or what they imagine can help them solve the problem. You, as an expert, both on technology and now hopefully in project management, you will transform these wants into actual needs. And by needs, we mean like you want to go back and tell the customers this could be a concrete imagination or a concrete understanding of what might help you solve your problem. And that is more and more used today in user-centered design, in several agile methods, and in different companies as the number grows. So what happens is you start prototyping. It's sketching things at a high level, but on a technology background. So you want to imagine, in our case, what the landing page would be, what the contents of the home home website would be, and then you kind of break it down into more concrete details. If you have different groups of services, you want to make sure that they are logically related. They are covered equally on both horizontal and vertical depths. So for example, if you imagine your software as having 5 modules, you don't want to start focusing on 3 modules and then you dive down into details. That would be a mistake because you want to see all the high-level modules. So you start with a landing page, a home page, and then you kind of want to cover the first lateral level completely. 4, 5, 6 modules as much as you want. Then you start going down into more and more details on each module. So on the one side, you don't want to just stay at high level, the top lateral level, but on the other side, you don't want to just dive too deep too early, because both of them would be a problem. That's why when we work on a prototype, you just want to make sure that you start with the big concept and then sufficient details at a level. You go down to more details and more details. This will also, as you cover more levels down, you will start realizing that there are some commonalities, some common screens that can be used in different places. You will start seeing that when you elaborate on one area, you want to go back to a previous area and elaborate on the same manner or on a parallel manner. You want to probably start deciding on technical things like do you need to log in to continue or not? Do you want to close the website entirely to people who are registered users, or most likely and most logically you want to have it open until the last minute? So you probably want to browse, look around before you really decide if you want to contribute to the service or not. So all these things are done with a prototype, which helps you on the one side create sufficiently detailed requirements, and on the other side, which is more important to us, is take it into a detailed scope. So while you see pure project management as taking the charter and expanding it into the scope, what we really do is we know or we learn how to expand the charter into the scope. It's not just by adding more details or more pages. It's more of going and sketching a prototype, refining it a couple of times until you have a concrete idea. And for that manner, we assume that you have sufficient. This is a fourth year senior project, so we expect that you already accumulated sufficient experience in your previous classes and study to at least have a reasonable prototype and a reasonable estimate. So once you have started playing around with the prototype, you want to start working on defining the requirements. It doesn't have to be a complete SRS requirement specifications or anything in details. If you want, there are very good templates online. IEEE has one. Each company probably has a couple of them, but it doesn't really have to be detailed at that level. However, it needs to be detailed sufficiently to provide details for the rest of the project. So this is again up to you to determine how far you go into the details. That's why I give an estimate of maybe 2 to 3 pages. I would say this is not required. It's not a hard constraint, but it gives you an idea about the level of details that you want to dive into. Then you start working on defining the deliverables itself. What are you going to deliver in your project? And that's going to be part of the scope. So you can also see them consistently over the course into the project deliverables and the process deliverables. And process deliverables are mainly how you're going to perform your work. Project deliverables are what will be produced at the end. And both of them are covered consistently throughout the project management methodology. Then the last thing that you also want to consider is how you're going to control your project in general, and how you're going to control your scope. Because we agreed already about what we call progressive elaboration, and that means iterate and iterate and iterate as much as you can. If you have doubt, go back and review your documents and make another iteration. It will help you get a better understanding as you progress. So how can you manage the changes? You cannot just keep changing things all the time, because we know from previous software engineering courses that change has a cost. You don't want on the one side to completely prevent changes, but on the other side, on the other extreme, you don't want to have changes as you wish, like at random, because both of them are bad. No changes will result in you going into delivering a project that nobody wants, and or the wrong project, as we say. Too much changes will add chaos and problems to your project management team, development, and everybody. So there are, if you work in industry, you probably know there are different mechanisms. We're not going to cover them in details, but there is a change management process. There's something, if you want, called call for a change, or request for change, or RFC is basically it's kind of an industrial standard for request for change, and that will help you put a process of when and how to change, and how to make sure you study the side effects of the change request before you do them, because not all changes are necessary. You want to probably decide if the change is urgent, or if it can wait, or if it can even go into a later version. You probably know that while Microsoft, for example, is delivering the next version of their operating system, they're already working on the version beyond and beyond. So that all can be part of your scope. You don't have to go into so much details, but this is just to give you a broad idea. So if you go on and want to make benefit of project management, what you really want to do is look at their processes. We have seen the matrix of 5 by 10, and I asked you to write them by hand to just get a sense of it. And this is probably, if you come up with one page out of project management, it's this one. And for every project, you want to have another one of your own, just as a cheat sheet if you want. What happened is project management is a collective set of a large number of well-organized processes that have been collected from thousands and thousands of projects, and you can see that it is growing and evolving all the time. If you had a chance to look at the PMBOK, the process management body of knowledge, they kind of summarize them into the best practices if you want, and they are broken down into processes. You don't have to take all of them, but you need to read all of them to understand what applies to your project and what not. And then you elaborate into your own. I worked in probably over maybe 200 projects in industry, and I managed several ones of them myself, and I can tell you no two projects are the same. Each project is different. It's as different as humans are. So for that matter, you want to read all the processes and decide what goes into your particular project and in what details. If you look at the process groups in scope, you will you will see that the first one is planning. Planning is a key issue everywhere. So plan, 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 plan. So I would say two important parts are the planning and the controlling. These are the two most important ones in the project management, and that's why if you want to look at the process groups, the matrix 5 by 10 matrix, you will kind of see a pie shape where planning and controlling is pretty much present in all the 10 expert areas. Some other parts are not, like for example execution is not everywhere, but planning and control are the most important ones. So if you want to work on the scope, you want to plan the scope, and the book provides excellent details and some examples of how to put a plan for the scope. Then once, as we talked, you put a plan, you want to work on the requirements, As we said, our approach is to look at the requirements through prototyping and then come back with kind of a rapid requirement document if you want. Then you need to go and put these into the scope. You want to define the scope. The scope at this moment is highly creative. Don't expect to use any tools that will help you. However, there are different ways of defining the scope, as we will see in the book in more details. There are building blocks on the scope that you want to pay attention to. These are basically the components of the scope. So the scope itself is high level, but you need to start elaborating into what we call work breakdown structure. These are the actual building blocks, and these are the most critical parts of the scope. You can see the building blocks as the classes and the objects that make up your software. Once you get it right with the work breakdown structure, everything else should be transformational. This is the part where you really need to go and have a lot of brainstorming, talk to experts, use your own experience, and look into parts of other projects. There are ways of building the work breakdown structure, but I assure you it is 99% human. You're going to have a lot of meetings, a lot of discussions, a lot of brainstorming sessions, a lot of this, a lot of that, to be able to nail it as much as you can. And remember, it's never going to be 100%. So as we go, the work breakdown structure will continue evolving. Once you have the work breakdown structure, you probably want to have some description of what it really is. We will learn from the slides and the book that work breakdown structure is additive, so you cannot have the same kind of work in two different parts, because later on, as we work on the schedule and on the budget, you will see that the work breakdown structure will be broken down into atomic parts. And in the end, how do you calculate the efforts? By adding these parts. So you cannot have something that an activity or work breakdown structure component that appear in two different places. Once you have sufficiently detailed work breakdown structure, you want to also define a mechanism of how to define the success criteria. We've learned this in software before. In this case, you really want to make sure that you put in place a validation criteria with the customer. Are they going to go over it? Are they going to review it? Are they going to hire a third-party consultant to come and review it? Or are they going to trust you on it? So these things are part of the scope as well. Once you have done that, you pretty much laid the foundational part of your project management. Just to summarize, you start with a charter, which is kind of a very high level, uneducated, uninformed understanding of what the project should look like. And this will be done normally at the very early stage between the company and the customer. And then you would start with the charter and with the project description, and go back and start sketching some prototype at a sufficiently sophisticated details, horizontally and vertically. Once you've done that, you come back with an elaborate description of what requirements should be, and that defines the difference between what the customer wants and what the customer needs. You define the latter one. You put them down into a scope, which is a detailed description. You can see it as an elaboration of the charter. But then the foundation of the scope would be the work breakdown structure. The work breakdown structure is really the part that will define the correctness of all the rest of your project. It's done with experts. It can have different levels of details. It can have a dictionary. It can have anything you want to make sure that you have sufficient description of your understanding of what the project should be. Next time we're going to be talking about more details, a little bit more details about work breakdown structure, and until then, good luck.